Now I'm ready. Thank you, Michael. Okay. Not despite, but because of my illness. I think I'm someone that's uniquely qualified to articulate and communicate a message of hope on a very difficult subject that, from my perspective, the world maybe hasn't got its hands on yet. I like to think of it and call it maybe that last great social injustice that we as a society still need to deal with. And to think that, for me, certainly, none of this would have been possible if I wasn't mentally ill. Crazy, but true. And this improbable journey in life that I'm living, I think is living proof, as I tell my children, that anything is possible if you put your mind to it. So what I'd like to do today is share with you a few stories. A few stories that I think all have one common denominator, and that's the power of art to heal. And I hope for you that they capture the essence of not only my own journey, but the opportunity and the importance of the work that I've decided to dedicate my life to. My handwriting stinks. My mother's here. I probably spelled it wrong. So, teacher, mentor. You are talking to a guy, or looking at a guy, who literally showed up one day at a children's psychiatric ward at a hospital that not only was I a board member of, but I was a patient. And I can assure you I had absolutely no idea what the hell I was doing. I painted, it made me feel better, and I thought it might help some kids. So I showed up. And that day I did the only thing that I was probably qualified to do. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I'm basically just a nobody, just a guy who found something. And I sat down with these kids and I told them my story. I told them my story and tried to give them some hope and some optimism and maybe add a little humor to a very scary subject that maybe wouldn't make it quite as scary for them. And initially, in the early days, I got caught off guard. And I got caught off guard because of the impact that I saw what was happening. The impact that I was having on the children, the impact that I was having on the staff, the impact it was having on the doctors, and equally as important, the impact it was having on me. And I kind of felt like I had stumbled maybe on something, that was, you know, kind of part motivational, part inspirational, part you can do it, all kind of wrapped into this message of hope. And in the early days, the program itself and what I was doing in there was very organic. And when I say organic, organic is another word for describing you don't know what the hell you're doing, right? And, you know, the notion occurred to me that we'd have the kids paint on real canvases so that they'd be real artists. I had them use foam brushes like you saw me use just now. because it free-flowed movement and got kids to be able to be spontaneous and not detailed and think and let them out of their box. We even took the blank canvases and in a grayish tone, we put the PeaceLove symbol. You could kind of see it. And the reason we did that was to kind of, it would almost act like a guide for these kids who would be frozen over the campuses and that couldn't start. And, you know, what ended up happening is, you know, I'd show up every week, and a lot of these kids became my friends. We shared a common bond, and a lot of great kids. And this one young man, his name was Cowboy John, all right? Cowboy John. Cowboy John and I had a routine that we did every week. I'd go into the class, and we'd get going, and he'd have the blank canvas, and this kid didn't know what he wanted to do. So I'd go, hey, Cowboy, what are you doing? He says, what are you going to paint? He says, oh, I have no idea. And I look back at him, and I say, oh, that's cool, because I have no idea either. You're my kind of artist. So you get all pumped up, right? So one day, I'm walking around the room, and I go over, and I come back, and Cowboy has got this canvas in front of him. And I look at it, and I couldn't believe what I saw. This one of the most beautiful PeaceLove symbols that I had ever seen anybody paint, like sweeping out of the sky in magenta and purple, and from each side, east, north, south, and west, there was an arrow pointing, and I knew exactly what it meant. I knew exactly what it meant to that kid. I knew that it had given him some direction, and that he was looking outside that box. So, as fate would have it with Cowboy, I show up about a month later, all right, and I tell people, you can't make this stuff up that happens in this place. I show up, and Cowboy comes running up to me, and he declares that he can teach the class better than me. So I said, bring it on. So I take my jacket off, I give it to him, he gets up here, and I go sit at the table and take his spot, role reversal. Well, he gets up there, and he did my entire shtick. All right, he said, welcome to Peace, Love, and we're going to paint for peace, and there's no rules, and he ripped them up and threw them and took a fine paintbrush and crushed it, and blah, 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 blah. So I'm sitting there at that table, right, and I started to cry. I'm a sentimental guy anyways, but I started to cry. And the reason I cried was I said to myself, now we got something. Now we got something. Take it in its contents. This kid had the confidence and the courage to get up and teach that class. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. It was as good, no, not as good, better. That experience that he led was better than what I could have done, and everybody else got something out of it. Speaker. Storyteller. I have no formal training. I can assure you of that. And the only speaking I had done for about 30 years was making my friends listen to the crap I would say to them, basically. But almost 20 years ago, NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw, and I'd actually forgot about this for a while, had done a piece on the Nightly News that featured my story. And I think looking back, I understood even back then how important it would be for people like myself to try to put a face on mental illness. Fast forward 16 years. 16 years, Hallmark finds out about what I'm doing. And they invite me to come to Kansas and speak at their Creative Leadership Symposium that they have biannually, and alongside some of the most inspiring, motivational speakers in the country, and me. And the topic that they had asked me to come out and speak to them on was courage, because they thought what I was doing was courageous. And to be honest with you, I've never thought of it as being courageous. I don't think twice about getting up here and bearing my soul to people. What is courageous, however, is to fight the demons and the illness and the disease that I have to fight like millions of people on a daily basis. That's courageous. And I got a note from an author of a book who sent me a couple years ago, and she actually said it in a wonderful way. She said, Jeff, it's not our right, it's our obligation for those of us who can to speak for those of us who can't. So I arrive out at Hallmark. In the first evening, they had a beautiful speaker's dinner, even fancier than the one I had at my house last night. It was in a boardroom, you know, that's what you do when you're a billion-dollar company. And all these mucky-mucks are there, and me. And I'm sitting at the table that evening, and all anybody wants to talk about is mental illness. It was incredible. I mean, there's some fascinating people, and they don't want to talk about they want to talk about mental illness. And at the end of the night, they wanted to get a group picture of everybody, so we all gathered in this room for this big group picture, and the photographer, the Hallmark photographer, the official photographer who had followed me all day at Crittenden Children's Hospital, where I had spent the day teaching children our program, he shows up to take a picture. He had taken one of the PeaceLove's shirts from the classroom, and he was wearing it. And he's sitting there taking the picture, and everybody's there, and I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty cool, huh? Well, the next day I was up, and the first speaker that day was the creative director for Nike. So he does his presentation, and I swear this thing must have cost $1 million to produce. I mean, it's got Tiger, it's got LeBron, it's got, you know, I mean, I'm so fired up, I'm like this. So he finishes, and then little old me comes running up to the stage, right, just like this. Now, Hallmark is in the business of touching people's lives and trying to find those moments in life. And what I did is I got up on that stage and again, you know, laid it all out and talked about the moments in life and how people that suffer from mental illness like myself, that's what we get robbed of. If you ask me what I treasure most in life, it won't be the big stuff that I'll tell you. It'll be the little stuff. It'll be having a cup of coffee with my wife, throwing the ball around with my boys, reading with my daughter without this chaos running around in my head. And it connected to them because that's what they were looking for. So it's funny, the night before, my mom, who's in the audience today, she had said to me, she said, hey, Jeff, how are you going to know if it goes well? And I said, I don't know. Well, I finished speaking, and they went to break after me. And I had the answer for my mother, because as I took the mic off and went like this, 30 people, whew, like this, on top of me. And it was Jeff, my father, my brother, my cousin, my uncle, me. And what had I done? All I had done was share my story. Well, I spent another day out at Hallmark and had an opportunity to speak to so many different people, including, you know, Don Hall, who's the Hall of Hallmark. And basically what I decided I was going to do is I was going to challenge these people, because it bugged me and bothered me and baffled me that you could walk into a store and you could buy a card for your dog, but you couldn't buy a card for me. Something was wrong with that. Creative voice. How could I have possibly thought that this journey would lead me to a place where I'd have that opportunity to speak for others? And as I look back and think about it, from the beginning, people always would come up to me and say, hey, Jeff, do I have to be mentally ill to be part of PeaceLove? And my answer always was, well, I haven't, I said PeaceLove is for everyone and anyone, because we all have a connection somehow, some way to mental health. About a year ago, I had the great pleasure of speaking at another one of these TED-type conferences, and the gentleman after me was Andre, who you'll hear this afternoon. And Andre is the CEO of the Craft and Hobby Association, which when you're in the creating peace of mind business is a really important group, because what they're doing, they're working with all the companies that are at the epicenter of actually creating products that can help people find peace of mind. So we struck up a natural relationship and decided that we'd meet a month later to talk about how we might collaborate for the future. So our team got in a car, we go down to New Jersey, and we get to their headquarters, and they bring us into this really nice boardroom. And they had a beautiful buffet lunch for us. And we were really pumped about that, because they don't usually give us food wherever we go. So after Matt was done eating, Andre said it was time to get started. And he said, why don't we go around the room and everybody kind of share who they are and what their role is, because it'll help us as we start to brainstorm. Makes sense? So Andre points over and he says, hey, Jen, why don't you start? Jen's a few down from me at the table, and I see her choke up a little bit. And she goes on to say, she thanks us for being part of the meeting, and she said she didn't know anything about it until the day before. And she went online that night to do some due diligence to find out who we were. And she had found her way to one of my talks. And then she took a deep breath, and she said, and she told the group what an important role art had played in her own life, where she then disclosed to that group where she had worked for 8 years for the first time, that she had suffered from substance abuse and depression. 8 years. Nobody knew. Not a word in the room. Nobody knew what to do. Andre, he got up and did exactly what I hope I would have done, or any of you would have. He walked around the table and he gave her a hug. He gave her a hug and said what courage it had taken her to do that, but also that what a defining moment it had been in her own recovery. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what had I done? All I had done was tell my story and maybe make it okay for her to tell her story. So I guess as I close, I've always considered myself to be one of the lucky ones. And the reason is I got diagnosed, I got help, and I've been able to lead a productive and wonderful life. But I also was given the opportunity to find my calling, if you will, the thing that, as my dad used to say, the thing that I could do better than anybody else. And that's an incredible thing for a lifetime. And I'm honored and humbled to have, the 8 other speakers that we have here today that are going to get up here and they're going to share their stories and their unique ways in which they're trying to make the world a better place and help us all, because peace, love is possible. I thank you.